Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, regardless of where you're joining us from. Thank you for joining Privado's podcast series. We have been meeting every so often with the goal to highlight some of the top performers and thinkers in the privacy and security engineering areas. But the goal is also to create a community of leaders who are on the ground, solving problems, making hard choices, learning and building new skills, and adding value to the companies they work for and the customers whose data they're supposed to protect. So, our special guest today is Jayati Dev from Comcast. Jayati, would you love to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you, Nishant, for the introduction. I am Jayati Dev. I'm a privacy engineer in the Comcast research and development team based out of Philadelphia.
Thank you. So, Jyoti, we have a lot of people in our community, in our audience, who don't quite know how to break into privacy engineering, or whether they are starting out or finishing up, or it's hard to sort of be good at a discipline that is itself so new. So, please tell us your story. How did you get here? What skills did you learn? What mentors, what successes and failures took you to this point? I would love to sort of hear your story, especially for the benefit of our audience.
Yeah, for sure. So I joined Comcast about a year ago, so I can speak from the perspective of a really early career privacy engineer. I'm an electronics engineer by training. So I did this cryptography internship at Indian Statistical Institute during my undergrad. And I was like, okay, this is cool. This is something I want to do. So I wanted to study encryption in IoT devices. So I was applying for different doctoral programs in the United States. But when I got into like the security informatics program at Indiana University, I saw that the cybersecurity field is so vast and there are just so many different things that are happening and so many different facets there. So I was working with my advisor, Professor Jean Camp, and I wanted to work on something that I care about. And it turned out that some of the projects I really cared about was how products and services affect user privacy. So whether it be like messaging platforms, um, different applications, email platforms, how do they how do they affect user privacy and what technical controls we can build in or we can recommend that would address or like mitigate some of the concerns that users have. So when I was looking for a position out of grad school, privacy engineering was is still kind of like a new field. So I was looking at different analyst positions, but then um, the privacy engineering position at Comcast was a great fit because I get to do technical research, but also work on like proof of concepts, which would impact um, products across, and that's what our team does. So there are just like so many amazing people who are working in this space and on so many amazing projects.
That was so good to hear, Jyoti. And especially gratifying is the fact that there is no one straight route. People take multiple routes. The goal, in your case, being to learn new things, fix new problems, help other people, learn from people. So, this is an example of persistence and humility. So, I really hope our community is taking note because there is no one way to get there. This field is very inclusive, but it's also very new. So, you can chart your own path. Tell me something, Jyoti, about the resources you use: courses, books, certifications, mentors. This is a pretty new discipline, and often there is imposter syndrome where people don't quite know whether they're getting the right training or not. And often people are afraid to sort of put ideas on the table because they don't have those hardcore privacy and credentials. So, what resources did you use to get here?
I think something that has been very helpful for me during grad school is core foundations in security and privacy and like programming, statistics, all of the different fields which support privacy engineering. It has been, I feel like those foundational classes have been really helpful for me. But apart from that, I think I try to do as much reading as I can about different academic papers that are coming out in like privacy engineering, the different work that is happening. And there are like so many different work happening in the engineering space, in the socio-technical solution space, legal space. So I try to keep track of the academic work, but there is also like a lot of work coming out of the industry in terms of like threat modeling and like developing additional tools. So I try to keep track of that, like Privado does. And apart from that, I'm trying to read like new books as well in the privacy engineering space. One of them is the Privacy Engineers Manifesto that I just started reading. So yeah, I try to, and then I try to also keep track of some of the current news that are happening in the privacy space. So I try to follow news, and I also get like some of the news from social media. So I try to like read as much as I can because it's kind of constantly changing and new things are coming up.
That is very helpful. I love the fact, again, just like your first answer, you're talking about multiple sources, multiple learning opportunities, and fusing them together, and also adding your own ideas. So, a lot of the way we do our jobs in this discipline, I've been in the field for about more than 10 years now. I have the same improvisational, hungry student attitude you have. But the job can be very interesting because there is no playbook, like there is no easy one way to do it. So, tell me a few things that you absolutely love about the job and a few things that might make the job challenging. So, let's have both sides of the story, and there are no wrong answers, so feel as comfortable as you can answering the question.
Okay. Yeah, I completely agree. It's like it's no one size fit all solution, which is why like we what I really like about my job is we get to collaborate with so many other people because everyone when you're building privacy solutions for different applications, each application has its own challenges. So I remember back in grad school, when I would write papers, it would be like, oh, companies don't do this, and then they should. This is one thing that they should be doing. But when you look inside, like when you work with different teams, you get to know that it's not. There are so many different moving parts to that, and you have to kind of like collaborate with different teams. So to get like a complete picture. So if you are building tools, like our team builds like a couple of different tools in privacy threat modeling space, security threat modeling, as well as like finding secrets in repositories, things like that. So we get to collaborate with like a lot of different people to make sure that those tools are kind of helpful. And the other aspect that I like is that we get to do a lot of problem solving because each application and each tool comes with its own sort of challenges. And like some of my colleagues and like whoever is in the space, I think they have similar issues as well with trying to solve problems the best we can to make it more privacy preserving.
That is great, Jyoti. And before I continue the conversation, just want to remind our audience we have a community that we are building, and it's not an abstraction, it's a real community of people like Jyoti and me who have a few things to teach you, and we also have a few things to learn from you. It's a way to build a community of people who are not just thought leaders, but they are action leaders. They do stuff as well. So please, Hernando from Bravado is going to be posting a link if he hasn't already. Please join our community. We want to hear from you because our community is nothing if not for the people in it. So please take a look at the link. Jyoti, continuing on our conversation, could you tell us some of the challenges that privacy engineers face in their day job? And this does not necessarily mean that the companies they work for are doing a bad job or something. It's more about the job itself is abstract. So, can you give us a sense of what are some of the things that make the job not just challenging but rewarding? Because it's only when you face these challenges that you actually get better. So, any insights to add about that?
I think the biggest challenge is kind of converting the legal aspects of privacy and academic aspects of privacy into technical requirements because we know like okay this is like a guideline or like a regulation that we have to be compliant with, but how do we actually implement it in systems? So like if a guideline says you need to have good privacy controls, but then how does it translate to like when you're actually building out a website, how do those controls look like? Do they have opt in, do they have opt out? So there are just so many decisions that go into it. But once that conversion is done, that can be very rewarding that you build something that is more tangible, but it also like has these guidelines and principles that support it.
It's great. What is one thing that you learned in this job in the last year or so that you thought you knew but was incorrect? Like, let me ask the question a bit better. Are there examples of things that you thought you had an opinion and strong ideas about, but now that you actually have done the job for a year or so, you have a different perception? Like, people don't often change their minds. We are creatures of habit. So how did this job change you in a meaningful way in the last year or so?
Yeah, the first thing was like I was like a very privacy idealist in some ways. So like okay, this is how companies should do it, and this is how like why don't they implement this? Why don't they implement um, this control? But then inside like on the job, I realized that there are just different teams doing different aspects of like a product. So if there's a product coming out, there are like development teams, there are design teams, there are like security teams, all of which would support that application. So it the problem becomes more complex, and it also involves some functional elements. So if we like have some privacy controls, it might we will want to balance it in such a way so that it does not take away from the functionality of the product itself. So you still want to have like a business product that is useful for customers without like and balancing it with like the privacy controls. So that has been like a new learning for me. And then as I talk to more people, I realize how complex this problem is, like when I talk to different teams. So yeah.
That is great. One of the things I have heard from a lot of privacy engineers is that they don't quite have a set template of who they work with, right? And the perception on the outside is privacy engineering is a legal thing. You work with attorneys and you do what they tell you to do. And you and I both know that's not true. That's only one part of the job. So, could you give us some examples of how you work with different teams in specific projects? Like, where do you start? How does that journey take you? Essentially, we're not looking for the final answer that you came up with. We're trying to understand how you allied with people to come up with the answer, including surprises or things that weren't exactly as you expected. So, mainly tell us a story, Jati. We're eager to learn from you.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we do is this try to reach out to as many teams as we can to like develop a privacy. So the good thing about our team is we are a research and development team. So we build privacy tools, but then that is something that connects across all different many different teams across Comcast. So it connects to privacy legal, it connects to privacy operations, threat modeling. It also connects to like public policy. So we try to gather aspects of like what is the engineering problem that we are trying to solve. So for example, if we are developing a threat modeling solution, um, what are the applications we are designing it for, who is answering those questions, are they developers? So we are trying to build for those, but we also talk to legal team and like policy team so that to make sure that what we are building is aligning with what are like what the guidelines are and what like legal compliance things we should also be looking at.
Has there been a situation where you have found that folks who are non-technical essentially started surprising you by asking technical questions and vice versa? I think one of the things that has happened in the last 10 years is a lot of attorneys have realized that they need to understand a bit more technical detail. And a lot of engineers on the privacy side also realize, thankfully, that they need to understand the big picture, the human component. It's not just about keys and numbers and things like that, right? So, have you sort of seen that happen in the last year or so?
Yes, definitely. We work with, so when we sit in some of these threat modeling teams, like threat modeling sessions that happen, it's a it brings together like people from all these different groups, and they ask questions. Some of them, like when they get to know the architecture of a product, they ask questions about like how does this work, how does this data transfer. It helps them see like an entire picture of like how the application works. And they do ask questions that are like technical: how do you store this data, where do you encrypt? And we get to know more about like how these different applications are different and they're processing data and how we can make those processes better for them.
That is great. So we have actually an audience question. I want to change our script a little bit. Uh, do you have any plans to open source the guidelines that you're talking about, like the map threat modeling? Because I think where the audience is coming from is there is the absence of known standards in cybersecurity as well, not just privacy, but especially in privacy because it's so new. And as we know, laws like GDPR are not very prescriptive. So do you plan on open sourcing some of your work?
Yes, so a map or models of applied privacy was a privacy threat modeling framework that our team developed. And we already have that open source actually on GitHub. And I'll post a link to that.
Perfect. That is great. So we'll make sure that Devesh gets the link from you so the audience can get it because I think it's always cool to build a community not just around ideas but also around specific goals and standards. Can you give
Yeah.
us a sense of? Sorry, you're saying, Jyoti?
Yeah, I was saying that yeah, we are trying to um, gather academic like knowledge and then build like a framework so that um, organizations who kind of do threat modeling, who are looking to privacy threat model their application, they can use something like Map that we have open sourced to kind of find threats in their own application.
And that inspires me to ask you a different question, Jati. When people think about threat monitoring, alerting, they think about security, and they think about an exfiltration attempt, DDoS attempt, or some kind of a privacy, a security harm, right? It's a very sometimes the phrase creates an impression in people's minds, and then they look at the work through that lens. But I love the fact that you think of privacy threat modeling as well, because those privacy threats typically don't emanate immediately. Like you don't always see the outcome right away. When there is a breach or an incident of that sort on the security side, the people doing the bad thing often want to know, like they want that dark fame, like they want to tell the world, hey look, we broke into this company. Privacy harms are very different. Privacy threats often are contextual in nature. So can you give us a sense of how people should think about threat modeling, especially when it comes to privacy, given that you are maybe among the three people I've talked to that has actually built something in this domain for threat modeling in privacy?
So the way we have kind of operationalized this is through personas. So um, it's for two reasons. One, it's like it's something that developers are comfortable with, like they know personas, and then it also helps communicate to like executives about what the actual threat could be and what the impact could be. So the way like the threat modeling tool that we kind of developed works is that we tell developers a persona that is this something that can happen to your applications. If we take like a real world example, and then we say that okay, this breach happened and this is how it happened, and it impacted the organization this way, do you think that's something that can happen in your application as well? And then if it does happen, what are the different mitigation that you should be looking at to kind of help mitigate those threats?
That is awesome.
So
So I would love to understand sort of what the reactions were in the beginning, because I can imagine people who you might have talked to in the industry, they would either say, "Oh my goodness, I want this because I don't want to be having this problem at all," and then there are other people who think, "Oh, it can happen to us; it will happen to somebody else," because denial and paranoia are both central to the human condition, right? So when you started having these questions and these conversations about how to apply this framework, what were the typical reactions you got in the beginning?
yeah, when we started, like after we released this framework, we had it as a research project, and then what we were doing is kind of doing these pilots with different applications to see what the reaction is, like how they perceive it. And yeah, some of the initial reactions were like, um, we are already doing like a we are asking a set of security questions. What are How are these questions different and how are the mitigations different? And then we were talking through these teams to say that okay, the impact of these could be different. It's not necessarily something you can measure, but it can be something that's like affecting a customer. So maybe autonomy harm, or the data that you have about customers, it could lead to some kind of discrimination. So we want that's why we do this early in the process and involve developers, so that um, they can get an idea of like, okay, these are the different threats that could happen and this could be the impact, like kind of early on in the process.
That is truly fantastic. And there a point when you thought, "Oh my goodness, I'm making a breakthrough here"? Like you come up with an idea, great. You get people to sort of sign on to you initially, great. But then there comes a point where you're like, "Oh my goodness, I'm on to something here. This is something that is not just going to work in this case, but it could benefit a whole lot of people and make the company and the discipline better." What was that moment? Like when did you, on the inside, feel not with data, but Jayati the engineer, Jayati the innovator, Jayati the problem solver, the leader? When was the moment when you felt you were on to something good here?
um, I think the way we were talking about like privacy threats as like not just um so some of these threats, when we go through them, it's not just talking about causing like protecting the data, but it's also about protecting the user. And I think that's the shift that has been happening in like the privacy engineering space, that we just don't want to like protect just the data, but we also want to protect like the user and all aspects of like the decision making, so that they can make meaningful consent, they have granularity in like what they do. So like that's the shift that I've seen in the way we talk about like privacy threat modeling solutions. So Yeah, that was like that made me happy as a so.
By the way, I
um,
hope the audience got that amazing soundbite from our speaker here. Jayati said, protect not just the data, but the user. There is a human being behind all of those numbers. There is a human being behind all the clicks and the engagements. And I think we have to be both very mechanical and surgical about protecting the data and the company and the user's information. But remember, there is a real person at the end of it. People like my dad, people like your sister, people like somebody else's parents, grandparents, people who may not be very tech savvy and who depend upon us to protect their data, right? So Jayati made an excellent point. Protect not just the data but the user. So I hope everybody listening internalizes that. So have a human component of the job as well as an engineering component. Both are critical. Thank you so
yeah,
much, Jyoti. Appreciate that insight.
and
My next question, I think we're almost getting close to the end of it. Were you saying something?
oh, I was just saying, like, yeah, we just need more research in like these different user groups as well too, because you said like there are so many different users, and there are sometimes different solutions for different groups of users. So yeah, that was my.
Definitely. And I think we have time for a couple more questions. So if anybody in the audience has questions, let me know because we're getting close to the end of our time here. So, Jyoti, I'm getting a lot of pings from people saying, I want to get into privacy engineering, but I don't have the coding experience. Or I want to get into privacy engineering, but I don't always understand what the laws mean. Or there are people who seem experts in this area and don't have the time to coach me. What would you tell those people? How can they get into the discipline and not just from an ad hoc basis, but in a formal role that pays good money, gives them a seat at the table? What patterns, what can we learn from you actually?
Um, I'm fairly new to the role, and maybe like you're the expert in this domain, but I think privacy engineering is kind of like has so many different facets to it. So even if you don't know coding, there are other things in privacy that are possible to do which do not require coding, like coming up with frameworks, processes, doing data mapping, all of that. So privacy operations, all of that does not necessarily require coding. But if you're someone comfortable with coding, you can build those tools, build like something like privacy preserving, like de-identification systems, automation systems, if that's like domain. So as a privacy engineer, there are just so many things that a person can do if they want to get into the space, depending on like what the role is.
And that is truly fantastic. Very good to hear. And I have to ask a question on my own. So one of the causes I've cared deeply about, many people in the industry have as well, is to build a base of privacy engineers, and also not just privacy engineers, but engineers period, who look like the customers we support. And I think we are struggling in that domain because we don't have nearly as many female engineers as we should. African American engineers, Native American engineers. It's not a very diverse field when it comes to biography. What advice would you give to the people trying to get into the field and people who are trying to hire into the field? How can we build a bench of privacy engineers that is diverse in terms of identity, background, thought, etc.? Can you, any feedback for us? Any ideas? We'd love to listen to you.
I think by making like when people are applying for roles, I think by making them a little more like broad, I think we can include that way we can invite more people to the table. So um, a lot of roles we want to make them so that people who are new to the field, and like a lot of cybersecurity professionals come like from different fields and they're starting out, we want to make them like part of it and see if we can invite more people there by making job descriptions a little broader, giving opportunity to learn and kind of help them grow and learn in their role.
Awesome. One more question come from the audience. Is there something you got to take account for when it comes to threat modeling when you have different agile changes happening across different fields? So you have a lot of features being built, a lot of capabilities being updated. So there is no stable state that you can have as a starting point, right? How do you use that to sort of essentially build out a more threat modeling type approach, even as the facts are changing as you are going along?
Yeah, which is why threat modeling is kind of also a continuous process. We do it pre-production, we do it post-production. It's and we do it every time there's a major change in the application. So as the application grows, um, it is nice to kind of also do multiple rounds of threat modeling to kind of see that if making changes to an application changes like creates new kind of privacy harms as well. So it's kind of like a continuous process. So as frequently as it can be done, that's like the best for an application.
That's great. And I think we have time for one last question, and I'm sure everybody's wondering why I haven't asked this question already. Perception exists that privacy engineering and security engineering were all a bunch of blockers. We stopped the business from doing cool things that make money. That is not true, but sometimes we have made that mistake, and the perception, for better or worse, exists. How do you battle that perception, Jyoti? How do you make sure that the business sees you as an ally, as a protector, as a good actor, and as a collaborative partner rather than a blocker? So, what approaches have you used that the rest of us can learn from?
Um, it's a good question. I think there's like an essay I read like a couple of years ago from Jack Polk, and he talked about information fiduciaries and
Hmm.
how companies are moving from like, yeah, we have to do compliance, we have to do privacy compliance, security compliance, all of that, but also kind of moving to a model where we are going beyond compliance to support customers and to protect their privacy, like to protect their data, which might not be covered by regulation, but we go beyond that to do that. So that's how we're trying to build that consumer, like that's how organizations try to build that consumer trust. Beyond that, I also think this is like what one of my colleagues like Webov talks about is like privacy is an indicator of product quality. So whenever we integrate privacy into products, the business case for that is that it automatically improves product quality because we are going through checks, we're making sure that data is handled properly, it's mapped properly when we are making like transfers between regions, it's encrypted properly. So it that automatically makes like a case for that. Okay, if it's a good product, we it is if it's privacy preserving, it's automatically a little better product.
That is so amazing. Good data hygiene, proper data destruction, sound access management, checking for secrets and logs. You could make the argument that that is as much about making the business better protected, more mature, more efficient, as it is about privacy. So, if you just for a few minutes remember one thing, the audience, just say this is not just about legal compliance. It's about building on compliance in a way that benefits your business. So, Jay, these examples were totally on point. We don't have time left for any more questions. Jyoti, thank you so much for sharing with us your knowledge, your experience, your perceptions. We hope this is part of a larger conversation and we hope you'll stay engaged with us. For the community, I'll say please click on the link Hernando has shared. We would love to have you on the show. We would love to have you tell us who we should have on the show. It's about growing the community, growing the discipline, making our platforms better, supporting our business better, all in the long term interest of supporting our customer base, our user base, and keeping them safe. So you can achieve all of these goals at the same time, a business and a skill perspective. So this is about privacy engineering as a force multiplier and as a differentiator. Thank you all so much for coming. We'll see you the next time. Thank you again.